You might not know this, but Microsoft is spying on every single thing that you do on the Microsoft Power BI and Fabric tenant, and they're logging it. Today, we're going to be showing you how to access those logs to understand what your users are actually doing in your Microsoft Power BI environment. Now, why might you want to do this? Well, it's simple. If you know what people are doing and what they're using, you can better serve them as a data analyst or as a business intelligence developer. Now, in this video, we're going to be using what's called a service principal. If you don't have one, don't worry. I showed you how to set one up in my previous video that I'll link down in the video description. But today, we're going to be using that service principal along with just a little bit of Python that we'll be explaining to go ahead and grab data out of the Power BI admin service and down into a CSV on your local computer. Are you excited? Well, let's jump in. So here is the Python code in question. And as you can see, it looks like quite a lot. But don't worry, the majority of this was written by AI, so it should be pretty easy to understand, right? Well, actually, it is, because all we're really doing is we're submitting an API request. And as part of that API request, we're passing some parameters. Now, those parameters are going to be a start date, an end date, as well as some filter criteria, like the type of activity that we want the API to return, as well as possibly the user who did that activity. We're also going to use pagination, which is what happens when the API request has more data than it can return in a single response. In that case, what Microsoft does is they add a URL that you can then use to submit an additional request to get the next set of results, and so on and so forth until there are no more future results. So, is this making sense? Well, let's look at the code and let's go line by line. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to import our modules. We're going to import the request module because we need that to, well, submit a request. We're going to import the Azure Identity module, and then we're going to import Pandas for manipulating the data. The identity model, by the way, is just used to acquire a token. Now, here is my service principal credentials. And don't worry, I'm going to be deleting this service principal. It'll be deleted after this video. The next piece that I'm going to do is I'm going to set my start date and my end date for when I want the activity results from. Now, I believe this can't span more than one day, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So I would double check that. And then these date timestamps are always in UTC. I've then declared and set a few optional filters. The first filter is for the activity type. And by the way, if you're wondering what kind of activities you can query for, it's right here. Here's the giant list of all the operations and activities you can look for on the Microsoft Fabric tenant. And then I also set a optional user ID filter. And if either of these are set to none, it won't apply. Then finally, I am setting the path that I want it to export out the results from the API to. The next piece of this is just simply acquiring a token for our service principal and then setting the headers of the API request to use that token, the base URL to the admin activity events, and then starting to initialize parameters. So our initial parameters will always include our start date and our end date that we're looking for activity events from. And then the next piece of this is essentially doing some logic where it's saying, hey, if there's an activity type set up above, or hey, if there's a user ID set up above, then join them together in a additional statement. So what it's doing is it's taking this initial parameters and it is adding in a filter key with either of these. And if there's more than one, it's joining them together with an and. The next thing that we're doing is we're setting some base events for pagination, and then it's printing the request number and it is submitting our API request. If the API request is successful with a 200, it's then getting all of those results, adding them to uh, this array up here, and then it's saying, hey, get the continuation URL. And if that continuation URL is not none or null, then set the current request URL to the continuation URL. So it's going to resubmit this, set the parameters equal to none, and then up page number. If there is no more continuation URL, then break and exit the loop because it's in a while loop up here. Otherwise, what it does is it goes through and it loops through and it continues to submit this request until there is no more continuation URL returned. Finally, it prints the length of the all events array and says, hey, it filtered for that filter activity type if it had a filter. And then we simply export this out to Pandas. It's rearranging the creation date and activity time, so it's up to the front. Here it is exporting to that specific path. And then if there are no events for it to export in the events export array, it returns, hey, found no matching events. So what does this look like while it's running? Well, let's take a look. So as you can see here, I told it to go analyze by Excel an external application, and I gave it a path. Now that path was this folder right here. And as you can see, if I go and I go open with and I open with into Excel, here is the data that it pulled. As you can see, I hit a semantic model with analyze in Excel earlier in the day, and this is not wanting to let me double click and expand my columns for whatever reason. So if you're interested in that code, you can download it on my GitHub, which is linked down in the video description. If you're interested in more videos like this, please subscribe. My name's Ned. That's my dog Jai, and hopefully you learned something today. Have a good night or morning when this one's posted.